The government has played a very sort of canny game with the media, that they've basically could have blacked this out through shutting down opposition cable, television stations, making it difficult for opposition papers to get the paper to print the news. They've shut down a foreign cable station as well. So I mean, they're not doing it in the streets, perhaps, but there's a pretty brutal effort to black out the news, which tells you, it seems to me, that they're pretty desperate.
There is a hint.
Right.
It does smack a little bit of desperation, does it not, Christopher Dickey? We've also heard these accusations from Nicolas Maduro this week against the consular officials of the American embassy, accused of sort of fomenting the troubles there. He seems to be a man with an increasingly flimsy grasp on power.
Well, I don't think he has the kind of charisma that Chavez had, who died a year ago. Nothing like. But he's definitely trying to be a little caudillo, just like Chavez was the big caudillo.
Like more like Cuba, let's say.
And I think that, you know, I worry sometimes when we talk about these situations, because there's always sort of the impulse to say that the protesters really represent the majority of the people. And that's not always true. And I think in a country like Venezuela, it really is kind of a big question mark, because you have these populist leaders, Chavez for many years, now Maduro trying with difficulty to follow in his footsteps. But the protests very often are coming from a class of people with resources and with background where they can speak to the Americans very easily, but they don't necessarily speak to the majority of Venezuelans. And I think that this is a real problem. It doesn't mean that they're wrong to protest or that they should be shut down. But I just think that analytically, we always have to be a little bit careful that we don't automatically decide that the protesters represent the majority in any of these countries where we see protesters.
But the issues that have brought them out onto the street, the food shortage and so on, are an actual problem in Venezuela
you
today.
were right about Venezuela, but something like 6 months ago, or even a year ago.
I'm sorry
for that. But it was a typical South American middle class revolt against, let's say, a populist power, and you were right.
And an election that they disputed.
Exactly. But now, when you have rampant crime, when you have high inflation, shortage of everything, basic things, basic goods like sugar and toilet paper, for example, or even paper for the newspapers, when you have that kind of stuff, it's not anymore a classic, let's say, opposition between the educated middle class and the people. On the other hand, it changes everything, you know, because on a daily basis, this government is completely incompetent, and it's true. And on the other hand, they reorganize entirely the security forces on a Cuban basis, on a Cuban, you know. So what is incredible about Venezuela, which is one of the richest countries of the region, you just to think that it's a rich oil country. Well, in that country, when you have shortage of everything, and you have a security force organized the Cuban way. So little by little, that marvelous country I personally quite know, well, is transforming itself into a Cuban economy. And nothing but that.
With oil.
With oil.
With
oil, and above all, but the same pattern. I mean, the same way, for example, they're dealing with the opposition, the same way they're dealing with newspapers, the same way they're dealing with journalists. And when I'm talking about violence in the streets, it's the most violent country in the world.
It has become.
It has become, you're right, you're absolutely right. It was not that way. They used to produce sugar. They used to be self-sufficient in food. And now they're importing everything from Colombia, for example. And you've got in front of you a president that can say, I quote, that is ready to send tanks, planes, troops, and all the military forces, I quote him, of the country in a little state called Táchira, at the border of Colombia, just because they protesting more than the region of the country. Can you feature it out?
Yeah.
The question is, I'm sorry, Sylvie.
No, you can see what he's also aiming at, Maduro. He's trying to identify this protest just with the opposition. Yeah. So, which is, as you said, quite, you know, it's kind of more the bourgeoisie and the upper middle classes and so on. And doing this, he can try to hide the genuine popular discontent with this terrible economic situation that you have described. You know, that's what I think he's trying to do. So,
like
you know, to discredit,
accusing the protesters of attacking train workers.
Yeah,
and so on.
will he be able to control this? I'm not sure. It's only a year since he's been in power,
and
he was elected with a very razor thin margin majority. So,
and I wonder whether
his situation is very precarious
across the country are all, in fact, this middle class. I mean, it strikes me that it's already sort of moved into another category.
You've got a little bit the same kind of situation in Thailand. When it comes to corruption, like in Ukraine, when it comes to economic problems, like in Venezuela, or when it comes to corruption, also in Thailand, it's no more about upper middle class, let's say, of the cities, which are generally the one who's protesting those countries. It's much more popular than that. It's why I was saying that you were right a year ago, but now really the problem is much more popular than classist, let's say.
Do you think he is desperate? I mean, that he's in danger of actually...
What I think is dangerous about that country is really the way they organize the security forces. Really, because, I mean, Cuba desperately needs the Venezuelan economy, so they're not giving it up. And Mrs. Maduro has been formed and trained in Cuba and has been chosen for that. So the grip of the Cuban regime on Venezuela is stronger every day. So
you see, this is quite interesting because we have Cuba, in fact, looking after the security or taking charge of the security forces in Venezuela, and then we have Russia taking care of the security forces in Ukraine. It looks like we are like 30 years ago, no?
Yeah. It's true. It's true. You know, if Venezuela's crime rate is so high, maybe they need a stricter security regime. I mean, you know, the most peaceful country in Central America is Nicaragua. It's really the only one that's safe. And there, guess what? They have a Cuban security regime.
So it might solve some things, but Antonio Bélanger, the problem, is it not, is that after years of Chavism and disastrous economic policies, a country run on subsidies, today simply the system no longer works, and it has at its head a man who, as Christopher Dickey said, doesn't have anything like the charisma of Hugo Chavez to keep it all going.
Such a rich country can be such a situation. I mean, it's a mystery for me.
It's the Dutch
it's as common as you can get.
It's common as corruption. It's as common as the way they deal with it.
Basically.
I would say that
Chavez, very many countries very much good.
Chavez would resist to the Cuban regime. I mean, he had the tools and even the power, the personal power to do that. But Maduro's, which has been barely elected, I mean, something like a year ago, it's really a catastrophe. I mean, really what I've heard about from internal people, I mean, from people living in Venezuela, it's getting worse and worse, above all since Maduro came to power, because there is no margin between him and the Cuban regime. It's what they think there, and it's what is they're having. I mean, when I'm telling about the security forces of Venezuela, I'm telling about the secret forces of the Venezuelan regime, which has been changed exactly 1 year ago on the pattern of the Cuban ones. I mean, I'm talking seriously.
We've mentioned this so many times now. I'm a little curious. What do we mean by the Cuban security regime? Do we mean like block committees where all your neighbors spy on you? That's a big part of the Cuban regime.
I mean the combination of the military on one hand and the secret services on the other hand. That's exactly what has been exported from Cuba to Venezuela into a Venezuelan regime. They really imported the way Cuba is organized between, on one hand, the armed forces, which are very powerful and which control basically all the economy of Cuba, well, the most important parts, and then on the other hand, the way they control the population through the security forces, the secret ones. And they imported exactly the same regime in Venezuela: strong armed force, and a security regime, security forces.
A new element this week is perhaps, Sylvie Kaufmann, the role of Leopoldo Lopez, who dared the authority to arrest him. It will be a rally on Saturday that will see his supporters come out en masse. The fact that he is in the hands now of those security forces, the fact that he's being held at a military facility outside Caracas, will provide a sort of visible opponent and rallying point for those who are dissatisfied.
It's a double-edged sword in a way, because of course he's being held by the military, he can be a kind of martyr that people his supporters will focus on, and so on. I mean, this video of his arrest are really incredible. I mean, this is really surrealistic.
He's Latin America.
Yeah, exactly. He's being allowed to address the crowds before he's taken away anyway. And but on the other and that's also. So that, in a way, it's making him increasingly popular, but also that reinforces what this attempt that I had been mentioning before, that to identify the protest with this part of the population and of the political opposition. He's the leader of the opposition, so he's not the man of the people. I mean,
sorry. Never forget that Venezuela is the country of telenovelas, and they're addicted to it, and they need their story. And I mean, what Mr. Lopez did was a typical telenovela arrest.
And he happens to be fairly
I'm saying
telegenic.
that meat seriously, meat of course, amusingly. But I mean, I'm serious about it. He choreographed, if you mean, his own arrest in order to be. To be as popular as possible in a very telenovela way.
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to succeeded. I mean,
and he made it quite fine.
Yes, that's why he's an opposition leader.
Right.
We're going to move on now to Iran. It was there were talks this week in Vienna, chaired by Catherine Ashton. The idea to build on the interim agreement that had been agreed on, found last November, and that saw Tehran agree to curb its enrichment of uranium in return for limited sanctions relief. This week, the talks that are to build on that interim agreement in the search of a comprehensive agreement were held. They had gotten off, Christopher Dickey, to a bad start. The Ayatollah Ali Khamenei the day before saying these are actually going to lead nowhere. In the end, though, it seems that they went better than perhaps the naysayers would have imagined at the beginning, and a framework for negotiations has been agreed on.
Well, yeah, look, everybody going into these talks staked out as tough a position as they possibly could without scuttling the talks altogether. That was the game. That was part of what Ayatollah Khamenei was doing. But the talks do have a long way to go. The essential problem is that the interim agreement froze things so that Iran would not get any closer to the stage where it could theoretically build an atomic weapon. At the time that the agreement came into effect in January, it was made in November, but it came into effect in January, the thinking was that Iran was really possibly only weeks away from that theoretical threshold. What the West wants to do is to pull it back from that threshold, to make it give up all sorts of things so that it will be years away. And I think that's not going to happen. I think that the talks will break down over that issue.
And everybody knows that.
And everybody knows
that it's not going to happen. They already have the bomb. Let's say that
You
way.
mean it's not going? There will be no comprehensive deal.
No, I mean everybody knows that Iran is about to have the bomb, and everybody knows that Iran has exactly what he wanted. They didn't want the bomb itself. They want the ability to build a bomb within weeks, which is exactly what they have.
Is that they become a nuclear threshold state.
Like other countries in the world, like Brazil,
agreeing with you by
like South
Twitter,
Africa.
why continue to negotiate with Iran? And yet, there have been a number of indications, Celestine, BOHLEN, that perhaps things were changing. We saw this agreement with the IAEA just about 10 days ago where Iran allowed them to come in and look at what may have been detonators that may at one point have been assembled in order that an atomic bomb could have been built. They seem, and what Hassan Rouhani has done and said since he's been in power has been remarkable. There has been an interim deal. Surely that is an important step.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that there's a political game afoot, which may or may not come to the agreement that everybody hopes for. But at the same time, Iran is engaged. Rouhani is a different character. He seems to have a little bit more leeway with Khamenei than other presidents have had. I mean, it's not clear, certainly to me, but perhaps even to people who know Iran better than I do, where that leeway stands, what can be done or not. But the fact is that, political movement is better than political stalemate. So It seems to me that, you know, and clearly the population is looking for more sanction relief and so on. So, I mean, there are little hooks in the game that
The truth is, Sylvie KAUFFMANN, that the Iranian economy is on its knees, and that Hassan Rouhani will surely have to make the sort of progress.
You know,
that
he reminds me of somebody that Celestine and I know and knew quite well. It's Gorbachev. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I saw him in Davos, Rouhani, in January, and the phenomenon of his presence, you know, he's the adoration of the American audience in front of him. He was really, he said everything they wanted to hear, and we wanted to hear.
And
we
to a
want
public used
this
to the
country
diatribes
to
of his
change,
predecessor.
and
It
his
was
main
extraordinary.
motivation is, as you say, the economy, and that was also Gorbachev's, in fact, motivation for change, for bringing out change, because the country was crumbling and the economy was falling apart, and he had to open up to do something so that, you know, and I think Rouhani has also this problem that if sanctions are not lifted, you know, the country is choked completely. Don't you think? You're an expert. So
no, I won't say I'm an expert, but I mean, I think that one of the things that Rouhani was doing at Davos, I was there too, is he was courting all these businesses. I mean, what's Davos about? It's about it's about multinational corporations. It's about money, and he was looking for money. And sure enough, sure enough, 100 plus businessmen go immediately to Iran.
There's a point there, which is
that the nuclear issue is settled, because everybody is becoming practical about Iran. Now that they have the bomb, let's say it that way, so let's be practical about it. So what they want? They want a better economy? Okay, so you can, and they want to have direct discussions with the United States. It's basically what they're having, and in exchange of that, you've got a great deal of negotiations.
Because do you think there is an acceptance on the part of the rest of the world that they have the bomb?
Yes, because you cannot go on with that kind of negotiation without that agreement. That basic things is that we cannot do anything about it. Maybe they have it already. Maybe they will have it within weeks. So let's be practical about it.
But also, you can't forget. I mean, the analogy with Gorbachev was all of that was going on at a time when the U.S. was negotiating.
Let's put forms around it.
Big arms control deals, which also had a kind of a hook.
I mean, I also think you need to look at what's the alternative. I mean, they're talking right now. If we were talking 6 months ago or a year ago, we would have been asking the question fairly actively about whether there was going to be a war with Iran, because that was the alternative. That was the way things were set up. Was Israel going to attack Iran? Was the United States going to back them? You can dismiss it, Anthony, but in fact, it was a real question. And I think that now it's much better that we're talking, because the truth is that all the hardline positions taken by the Bush administration, initially some taken by the Obama administration, by Iran, by Europe, by France, by Congress, didn't do a damn thing to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear threshold state.
So you agree with Anthony then that in fact there's an acceptance?
I could never agree with Anthony.
But just this once. You believe then that there's an acceptance that Iran is where it is?
Oh, I think that, yes, that's sort of where I started out.
So it's a capitulation on the part of the rest of the world.
Yeah, basically it is a capitulation. But compared to the position of 5 years ago or even a year ago.
Which was also a stalemate. I mean, and they were still proceeding towards the threshold capabilities.
I mean, it's a negotiation. When you are around a table and you're negotiating, it's not a capitulation. It's just, okay, you've got the bomb, now you've got plenty of things to negotiate about. And they're begging for negotiations. That's a very good starting point.
That's what I'm saying.
And the Americans, for the very first time in 30 years, are doing what the Iranians are saying, are asking, or begging for more than 30 years, which is just sit on the table and just speak about it. And it's very important, because the Shia, we're not going to explain once again what is the Shia axis, but say that it's a reversal of alliance, which is quite interesting to see. So, no, it's not a capitulation. I would have never said that within a year from now.
It's a wonderful, in the Middle Eastern mosaic, it's a fascinating thing, because
yes, it is.
What are our traditional Arab allies most afraid of? Are they afraid of Iran being a nuclear threshold state? No. They're afraid of Iran becoming America's best friend in the region. Yeah, that terrifies them.
And that is what lies ahead and what's scaring them today.
I don't know if that's what lies ahead, but it's a possibility. And Iran is so big, potentially so rich, the people are so smart, and it's so sophisticated.
That's the point.
That if you're sitting in the United Arab Emirates or Saudi or any of these countries, and you look at the possibility that the United States is going to have a working, functional relationship after 30 years with Iran,
such a sophisticated country,
that is a huge threat,
And
much bigger than
with
nuclear
all the
It would be a
weapons.
game
You're
changer in the
absolutely
Middle
right.
East.
Oh,
for the
absolutely,
good.
it would
But
be.
I mean, it for the
Could
good.
be.
For the good.
It
I
will
don't. I mean, I see it again as kind of engagement is better than frozen positions and yelling across the
Never
barricades.
forget how
I mean,
clever and sophisticated is the Iranian population. Never forget that, for example, if the actual revolutions, I mean Arabic revolutions, you know, began in 2009 in Iran by huge demonstration, the Green Movement. Never forget that this is a very, very interesting country with our standards.
But if negotiations are good and dialogue is good and these possibilities are good for everyone, there are certain certainties in the old rigidities of the way things were until now. I mean, the whole Shiite and Sunni question will be entirely redrawn in a way that announces all kinds of unpredictable things that for now no one can imagine.
right. I mean, I think game changing is not necessarily always lead to positive things. I mean, the Arab Spring was a game changer, and it's not necessarily.
And there are a lot of
happier
issues. I mean, you know,
Syria is one of
again,
them.
these issues come and go in fashion, but terrorism is a real issue. And Iran's relationship with Hezbollah, its relationship with all kinds, with the Iraqi government,
With the Syrian regime.
with the Syrian regime, all of these things are problematic, and they are not small problems. We're looking at a Middle East that is just disintegrating. And Iran seems to be in a pretty good position at this moment. But we'll see. We'll see if it comes under pressure, if Hezbollah comes under pressure. Already we see a lot of car bombings in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah. The Saudis are on a full court press against Iran's influence in the region and using every means at their disposal, a lot of it pretty ugly, all of which is very problematic. Iraq, we don't know exactly how Iraq's going to go. We don't know if Maliki is going to be reelected. All of that's up in the air. Suppose suddenly Iran feels that Iraq is drifting out of its sphere after these last couple of years. We don't know how that will react. So there's a lot going on.
The region has never looked, in fact, more
It's why
uncertain.
it's so important to discuss with the Iranian.
Right.
And not to.
Well,
It's
good
why
reason
it's
to be
so
talking to them.
important to
That's right.
discuss
I mean,
with the
again,
Iranian.
back to
And
better
you
to
never
be
know what
engaged
you have
than
in
be-
balance. I mean, against, for example, negotiation with the Americans. Well, let's have a dream. Maybe the Syrian situation is at stake because it's not that strategic to the Iranian regime. In many ways, Iraq is much more strategic.
Well,
to
yes,
her.
Iraq is a lot more strategic.
Obviously much more. So maybe you can have a general agreement on that. I don't know.
Better
But
around the table
only thing I
talking
know
than
is
the
it's
alternative
very important to
days.
talk with them, to
That's all.
just set on, just have that conversation with they're having to.
And this is the point, then. We're not talking about the bomb anymore. We're talking
No,
about the
because
rest.
they have it. That's it. And everybody knows it.
We're going to go back to Ukraine quickly, coming to the end of tonight's The World this week, to have a look once more at those images from the Maidan, those images of the people who have gathered tonight as this deal has now been struck, a deal, of course, that could spell the end of the troubles, the end of the protests, the end of the carnage. Just quickly, I'll go around the table one time. How hopeful are each of you, very briefly, that that will be the case tonight?
Of course, I'm hopeful, but I think we have to wait for the weekend and see, what happened. We've had a lot of surprises on Sundays in Kiev and in Ukraine. What will be the mood of the people after when they bury their dead, and if they gather, tens of thousands of people again on the Maidan on Sunday, will they be angry? Will they be peaceful? I don't know. I think it's very unpredictable, I would say.
There'll be much emotion to be watched in Ukraine over the coming days. Anthony, your view on tonight's deal?
I'm always optimistic about situations like that. First, because it cannot be worse. And second, because I really believe that the most important is not at stake. Ukraine is going to stay an independent state. And at the end of the day, I think that Mr. Yanukovych will have to give much of his power, which he's trying to do right now. I don't know. But anyway, I'm still optimistic about such situations.
Christopher?
I think that things will calm down over the weekend and for the next several days, maybe for a few weeks. I think there's a kind of a shock that settles in after the kind of carnage we saw in the last couple of days. But I don't think the problems are going to be resolved. I think Yanukovych is going to stay. I think people are not going to trust him. I think Putin is going to continue to maneuver. And I don't think that the Europeans really have an answer to all of this. So I think the problems are going to go on, but the immediate sense of crisis and carnage is over for now.
Celestine, the last word to you.
I mean, I think, as we've said before, I think the fact that Yanukovych and his regime, maybe his interior minister is gone, but his regime and he himself are still there. And for the protesters, that is their demand, essentially. And you can argue whether, democracy should happen in the street or whether it should, it's better to be back in the parliament. But I think until some kind of a deal gets clinched that puts him in the exit strategy here, I think it'll be hard to contain what is a very, very angry group of people. And I'm not sure, to be honest, that the EU can do anything. I mean, I just don't think they can. I mean, there's not the money, there may be money on offer at some point, but that's not what's going to buy peace here. I think we need a political solution that's of.
Mrs. Tymoshenko is about to leave
that will be another significant issue, no doubt, over the coming days. Thank you to all my guests for having been with us tonight. That was The World This Week.